I'm making a series of short videos on a number of topics that are Python related. Hopefully you've already watched some. If you haven't, then watch the videos on arithmetic operations, on variables, on strings. But in this short video, I want to cover something called control of flow. Okay, and to make it easier, I have made it into 5 sections. I call them C1 through C5, and each one will cover a topic. But first of all, in C1, let's take a look at what do we mean by flow control or control of flow. Okay, that's what C1 is about. So let's take it step by step. What is it? So a program's control flow is the order in which this program executes code, the lines of code. Okay, what is the order? How do you control that order? Specifically for Python, the control flow is regulated by either by loops or by conditional statements. And we'll look at both in the next section. But now let's understand this some more. I created this picture because I think it helps explain exactly what is going on. There are 3 concepts that we want to cover under control of flow: sequence, repetition, and selection. Think of each blue line as one line of code. Okay, in sequence, in the simplest programs, you simply write one line of code, the next one, and next one, and you just go through them. So nothing fancy. But sometimes maybe you want to execute a couple of lines of code and then execute one block over and over again with some variable or parameter changed in it. We call those repetition, right? You want to repeat and then you continue along. So for repetition, you will use control of flow. And finally, when you want to select, maybe the program comes to a point in which case you either want to run these 3 blue lines, or if the green condition is satisfied, you could run these 3 green lines. That is also an illustration of when we would use control of flow. Now, there are some concepts. In order to control flow using selection itself, there are 2 options. We could use if statements, which we will see, and towards the end, we'll see how to use while loops. Okay, if statements are a lot more common. But before we go there, if we want to control for repetition, we will use something called for loops. Okay, that's what we're going to look at next, for loops. So again, by way of illustration, just a simple example. Think of each line here as one line of code. In a normal program, you simply go line by line. However, if you want to use a for loop, maybe you go through a few lines of code regularly, and then there's a for loop. You say for I in range 3. That means that I can only take on the value 0, 1, 2. Then the code comes here. The index variable I takes on the value 0, and then it will execute these 3 lines. Then the index variable becomes 1, and then it will execute these 3 lines. Then the index variable becomes 2, and then it will execute these 3 lines. Once all of these are done and range 3 has been reached, the loop cannot continue anymore, and then it exits the loop, and then it goes on. Okay, so that's exactly how a for loop works. If you understand this, you are beginning to understand for loops. So they're used for repetitive tasks. Sometimes it's easier to actually look at lines of code. So I've written in the first block here, for I in 0, 1, 2, 3, you could print I. And here I'm saying that temperatures are 100, 88, 90, and 120. And then I'm writing a for loop. For T, for each value of T in temps, T is a temporary variable, okay? Temps stands for the list of temperatures, but T is the index variable here. T can take on any value. But when you print T, you notice that it is printing first value 100, 88, 90, and 120. I also want you to notice one more thing. Notice the indentation, right? That is, there are 4 spaces after the for loop in the next line before we write print T. And in Python, we use indentation to show which lines of code belong to one for loop. A for loop could have more than one line of code, and this is how we do it. All right, now let's look at part 2. The second concept, C2, that we want to cover is the idea of a Boolean expression. The term Boolean simply means true or false, right? Something that evaluates to true or false. So a Boolean expression is an expression whose outcome or evaluation is either going to be true or false. Let's take a very simple case. Is 3 less than 4? This is actually a Boolean expression. 3 less than 4? True. But is 3 equal to 4? Is exactly equal to. In Python, you say is equal to by equal to. Is 3 equal to 4? No, it is not true, and so it evaluates to false. We can also do this for variables. Let's say that an age is equal to 12, and then you ask, is age less than or equal to 19 and this variable age is greater than or equal to 13. 12 is less than or equal to 19, that is true. The first part is true, and 12 is greater than 13 is false. So true and false overall becomes false. So this is false. For the same age equal to 12, if you say age is less than or equal to 19, or age is greater than or equal to 13, because of the or, the first part is true. So we don't even need to evaluate the second part, and this is true. This is all you need to know for Boolean expressions. Now that we understand Boolean expressions, let's come to C3, the third concept, which is conditional statements, specifically if statements. Let's see how an if statement works in Python. Okay, as we saw before, we don't want every line of code to get executed. Depending on the condition, we may want either the red 3 lines of code or the green ones to execute. Okay, so we want to control the flow of this program, and in order to do that, we would use an if statement. Here is how an if statement works. You can see here, if some condition is true, and then notice the indentation and the colon, statement 1, statement 2. So statements 1 and 2 will get executed only if these conditions, if this condition is true. Otherwise, they will not get executed. Look at an example, and it will become clearer, right? I have defined a variable called brand, and I'm making it equal to 0. And then I'm saying that the phone type is equal to Samsung. Then I'm saying if phone equal to Android, brand is equal to 1. So when Python runs this if condition evaluates to false. So it never comes in here, and this line doesn't get executed. So when you print brand, you still get a 0. Notice what happens if I change my phone to Android. Now we start with brand is equal to 0 as we did here, but we say if phone is equal to Android, brand is equal to 1. This Boolean expression does evaluate to true, so this if condition is true, it comes in, so it will run this line of code, brand becomes 1, and when you print brand, you get 1. Okay, that's the basic of how if statements work. Continuing on what we learned in C3, we are going to make the if condition a little more complex. So in C4, we are bringing in else as well as elif, which is a short form of else if. So it just builds on if. Since we understand if, we can understand this. So we are saying if some condition is true, then statement 1 and statement 2 should get executed. Else, if the first condition is, if the above condition is not true, statement 3 and 4 should get executed. Notice a couple of things. These two statements are indented, so I know that both statement 1 and 2 belong to the if block. Similarly, statements 3 and 4 both belong to the else block. Second point to remember, only this set, either this set or this set, only one of them can get executed, only one set. So either statement 1 and 2 get executed, or statements 3 and 4 all 4 cannot get executed. Okay. Now that was if else, but you can also do if elif else. So elif, again, like I said, stands for else if. So if this is true, then do these things. Else, if this second condition is true, then do perform or execute statement 3 and 4. If nothing above is true, then just execute statement 5. 2 or 3 things to keep in mind. Okay, notice the indentation that tells you that there are 2 statements in the first block. If second condition has also 2 statements, but the third else has only 1 statement in this case. Notice that if as well as elif as well as the else have a colon. Everything should end with a colon, and by looking at the indentation, we know how many statements there are. The final point is that only one of these 3 blocks, in this case I have 3 blocks, right? The if condition, the elif condition, or the else, only one of them can get executed. If the first condition is true, it will execute these 2, and then it will not even check for anything else. It will come out. But if this is not true, it will check and maybe says, oh, is second condition true? Yes, yes. Then it will execute, but it will not execute the else part. If none of the above are true, then it will execute the last statement, and then Python will be done. Okay, that's how if, else, elif works. Now let's look at the second type of conditional, which is the while loop. Okay, so this is part 5 of our quick tour of control of flow. How does a while loop work? This picture may help some of you. So let's take it piece by piece. First, we are going to evaluate for a condition. Is this true or not? If it is true, we're going to come here. If it is false, we're going to get out. If the condition is false, we are done. Okay, we can continue on with the rest of the not the while loop. But as long as this condition holds true, it will run some code and then it will go back and check the code again and again. All this will make more sense when you look at an actual line of Python, a few lines of Python code that I have written here. So in here, I start by saying my variable I is 6. And then while I is less than 20, do something. And then finally, I'm saying print out of the while loop. What are we doing while I is less than 20? We are saying I is equal to I plus 2.5. So I value keeps changing and then it prints it and then gets out. So what happens? First it prints 8.5 because 6 plus 2.5 and it's still less than 20. 11, 13 and a half, 16, 18.5, 21. Then when it goes back to check, 21 less than 20 is no longer true. So it jumps out of the while loop, prints out of the while loop and it's done. Now, something to note here. Again, notice that the while loop is followed by a Boolean expression and a colon, just like we saw for if and elif and so on. And again, notice the use of white space or indentation, right? 4 spaces tell you that these 2 statements are part of the while loop. A while loop can have 10 statements or any number of statements, but they should all be indented. Okay, that's how we know visually that that block is part of the while loop. Okay, so very quickly we covered all 5 parts. We looked at what flow of control is. We looked at things like sequence, repetition, conditions. We looked at the for loop. Then we looked at if, elif, else, and then finally we looked at the while loop. Okay, thank you.